Is there something that happens after death? Something our science still can't explain? Throughout all these years as a nurse, I always believed only in what I could see, touch, prove, until the day I witnessed something that forever changed my understanding about life, death, and forces that exist beyond what our eyes can perceive. My name is Marina, and today I'm going to tell you the most inexplicable, most spine-chilling, and at the same time, most hopeful story I've ever experienced in my career. A story that began with a tragic death and ended with 12 lives being saved in a way that defies all medical logic we know. It was a Friday, 3 a.m, at St. Joseph Medical Center here in Boston. The kind of dawn that every healthcare professional knows well. That heavy quietness that seems to announce something is about to happen. I was on duty in the ICU when the call came that none of us would ever forget. Marina, you need to come to the emergency room now. We have a case. Different. Dr. Patricia's voice was strange, as if she was trying to process something she couldn't understand. When I arrived at the emergency room, I found a scene that chilled my blood. James Mitchell, 34 years old, engineer, father of 2 young children, was being declared dead after a devastating car accident. But it wasn't James's death that had left the entire medical team in shock. It was what had happened in the last 40 minutes since his arrival at the hospital. Dr. Robert Harrison, our most experienced neurologist, was visibly shaken. "Marina," he said, his hands trembling slightly. "In 25 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like what just happened here." James had been admitted to the hospital at 2:15 a.m. Multiple injuries, severe head trauma, massive internal bleeding. The team fought for 40 minutes to save him. But at 2:55, Dr. Robert was forced to declare his death. James Mitchell had departed, leaving behind a pregnant wife and 2 children who would never see their father again. But it was exactly at that moment, when the equipment was turned off and death was officially declared, that something began to happen that none of us could explain. "Marina, you need to understand," Dr. Robert continued, his voice low as if sharing a dangerous secret. "When I declared James's death, something strange happened to me. Suddenly, medical information about other patients in the hospital started coming into my mind. Information I had no way of knowing." Dr. Patricia approached, still in a state of disbelief. Robert started talking about Mrs. Thompson from room 203. He said she was having a silent pulmonary embolism that none of us had detected. He told us to run there immediately. And we did run, Robert completed. When we arrived at Mrs. Thompson's room, she was exactly as the voice in my head had described, beginning to show symptoms of embolism. If we hadn't arrived in those 5 minutes, she would have died. My heart was racing. As a nurse, I had seen many inexplicable things in hospitals, but this was beyond any previous experience. "Dr. Robert, are you telling me that..." "I'm telling you that someone, or something, was giving me precise medical information about patients I had never examined," he interrupted, looking directly into my eyes. "And Marina, it didn't stop with Mrs. Thompson. There were 12 cases, 12 lives that were saved that dawn, because an experienced, rational, and skeptical doctor began receiving information he had no way of knowing. Information that came to his mind like urgent whispers, as if someone was desperately trying to communicate something crucial. The first was Mrs. Thompson with the pulmonary embolism. Dr. Robert began to list, his voice gaining an almost mystical intensity. Then came William, from room 315, who was developing sepsis that would only be detected hours later by routine tests. Next, little Emma, only 8 years old, who was in pediatrics with acute appendicitis that had been diagnosed as gastritis. Each name he mentioned was accompanied by precise medical details, symptoms that hadn't yet manifested, complications that would only be discovered hours or days later. It was as if someone had given Dr. Robert a vision of each patient's medical future. "But Marina, the most inexplicable wasn't just the medical information," Dr. Patricia added, her voice almost a whisper. "It was the way Robert received it. He said he heard a voice, always the same voice, urgent but calm, that repeated, 'Doctor, please, they still have time. We can still save them.'" At that moment, looking at the shaken faces of my colleagues, people I deeply respected for their competence and rationality, I understood I was facing something that would forever change my perception of the mysteries surrounding life and death. something that would remind us that even in modern medicine, there are still forces our science cannot explain. The voice that Dr. Robert heard, the voice that saved 12 lives that dawn, had a very specific timbre and cadence. And when, hours later, James's wife arrived at the hospital and began talking about her husband, we all recognized something spine-chilling. It was exactly the same voice that Robert had heard throughout that dawn of inexplicable miracles. "Marina, I know how this sounds," Dr. Robert continued, running his hands over his face in a gesture of mental exhaustion. "I know it seems like madness. 30 years of medicine, neurology residency, master's degree, doctorate, everything based on science, on proven facts. And now, I'm here telling you I heard the voice of a dead man guiding me on how to save other patients. What happened in the next 6 hours challenged everything we knew about medicine, about communication, about the very nature of human consciousness. Dr. Robert, always the most skeptical of the team, became the channel for precise medical information that saved one life after another. The third case was Mr. Rodriguez, 67 years old, admitted to cardiology. Dr. Robert continued his account, his eyes distant as if still processing what he had experienced. I had never seen his chart, never entered his room. But suddenly, that voice started telling me he was having silent microinfarctions that weren't being detected by the monitors. Dr. Patricia confirmed with a nod. We ran to Mr. Rodriguez's room and, exactly as Robert had heard, we found subtle signs of ischemia that had gone unnoticed. If we hadn't adjusted the medication at that moment, he would have had a massive heart attack within hours. What impressed me most wasn't just the correct diagnoses, but the maternal urgency that Robert described feeling. Marina, it wasn't just cold medical information I was receiving. It was as if someone who deeply loved those patients was begging me to save them. There was an emotion, a loving desperation in every guidance I received. The fourth case made me cry, Dr. Robert admitted, his voice failing slightly. Little Sophia, only 3 years old, was in pediatrics with what we all believed to be a simple respiratory infection. But the voice told me she was developing fulminant bacterial meningitis. Doctor, please, she's so young, she still has a whole life ahead of her, was exactly what I heard. When they ran to pediatrics and performed emergency tests, they discovered Sophia was, in fact, in the early stages of meningitis that would be fatal if not treated immediately. If we had waited 2 more hours for the regular diagnosis, we would have lost that child, Dr. Patricia said, wiping a tear that had escaped. But Marina, it was the 5th case that I began to understand it wasn't coincidence. Dr. Robert continued. Tyler, 19 years old, had been admitted with suspected overdose. He was stable, being monitored. We all thought it was just a matter of time for recovery. But the voice became almost desperate. Doctor, he didn't take drugs. It's carbon monoxide poisoning. The whole family at home needs to be evacuated now. What they discovered afterward was devastating and miraculous at the same time. Tyler hadn't suffered an overdose. He had been slowly poisoned by a carbon monoxide leak at home. When the emergency team arrived at the family's residence, they found Tyler's parents and younger sister in critical condition, but still alive. If we hadn't gotten there at that hour, we would have lost an entire family, Dr. Patricia whispered. At this moment, I need to pause to speak directly to you who are following this story. I know what I'm telling challenges our rational understanding of the world. I know you might be thinking whether this really happened or if it's just an invented story, but I want you to know that stories like this remind us that there are still deep mysteries about life, about death, about love that transcends barriers we can't even comprehend. If you've made it this far, it's because something in your heart recognizes the deep truth of this story. Maybe you've already felt the presence of someone dear who departed. Maybe you've experienced moments of inexplicable intuition that saved your life, or the life of someone you love. This connection we feel with each other, this love that seems to have no end. This is real and powerful, even when we can't explain how it works. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to make you a special invitation. Be part of this family that believes there are greater forces working for good, even in the most difficult moments. Activate the notification bell, because every week I share stories that remind us of the magic that exists in real life. Stories that give us hope when we need it most. You who follow me know this is a safe space, a place where we can talk about life's mysteries without fear of judgment. In the comments, You share your own inexplicable experiences, your own stories of love that transcends death, and this creates a support and understanding network that goes far beyond any video. Now back to that extraordinary dawn, when James Mitchell, even after death, continued saving lives through Dr. Robert. Marina, it was the 8th case that I understood who was talking to me. Dr. Gao, Robert said. And for the first time since he began telling this story, I saw a smile mixed with tears on his face. It was Mrs. Garcia, 78 years old, who was in the ward with pneumonia. The voice told me she was having a severe allergic reaction to the antibiotic we had prescribed, but her vital signs didn't show this clearly yet. When we arrived at Mrs. Garcia's room, Dr. Patricia continued, she was beginning to show the first signs of anaphylaxis. 15 more minutes and we would have lost her. But what happened next was what really made us understand who was helping us. Dr. Robert looked at me with an expression that mixed amazement and deep gratitude. When we were treating Mrs. Garcia, she suddenly grabbed my hand with surprising strength for someone so debilitated and said, "Doctor, thank you for saving me. But who is this angel by your side? This young man with brown hair who keeps repeating that there are still more people to save." My blood froze. Mrs. Garcia was describing James Mitchell, the man who had died 4 hours earlier, and whose family hadn't even arrived at the hospital yet. She had no way of knowing about his existence, much less his physical appearance. That's when everything made sense. Dr. Robert continued, his voice filled with emotion. The voice I was hearing, the medical information I was receiving, the desperate urgency to save each life. It was James. Somehow he hadn't completely departed. He was using his last opportunity to do good, to save lives before continuing his journey. What happened in the next 2 hours was a race against time, orchestrated by someone who technically no longer existed. James, through Dr. Robert, identified 4 more critical cases that would have gone unnoticed by the medical team. The 9th case was young Kevin, 16 years old, who was in orthopedics with an open fracture. Dr. Robert continued his extraordinary account. The voice told me he was developing a fat embolism that would only be detected when it was too late. "Doctor, he's the same age as my son. Please don't let this family go through what mine is going to go through." When they ran to examine Kevin, they discovered the first microscopic signs of fat embolism. If we had waited for the obvious symptoms, Kevin would have died within hours, Dr. Patricia confirmed. The 10th case completely broke me, Dr. Robert admitted, his hands trembling as he remembered. It was Sarah, a 32-year-old mother who had given birth 2 days ago and had what seemed like normal postpartum blues. But James's voice became almost desperate. "Doctor, she's not just sad. She's planning to harm herself. She has 3 young children at home waiting for her. Please don't let these children grow up without a mother like my children will have to." When the psychiatry team was called to evaluate Sarah, they discovered she was, in fact, in a dangerous state of postpartum depression with suicidal ideations. She had hidden her feelings from all of us, Dr. Patricia said. If James hadn't alerted Robert, we could have lost not only Sarah, but left 3 children orphaned. The last 2 cases were equally impressive. Dr. Robert continued, Mr. Davis, 54 years old, who was having a silent stroke that our tests hadn't detected yet, and little Isabella, 6 months old, who was developing a resistant hospital infection that could have been fatal. What impressed me most was the surgical precision with which James directed Dr. Robert. These weren't vague intuitions or medical hunches. They were specific diagnoses, detailed treatment guidelines, even medication dosage suggestions that proved perfect for each case. Marina, at 7 in the morning, when my shift was ending, James's voice became weaker. Dr. Robert said, his voice almost a whisper. He told me, "Doctor, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for saving these 12 lives. Now I can depart in peace, knowing I did something good with my last opportunity. Take care of my family when they arrive. Tell my wife I'll be waiting for her. But I want her to live many happy years before that." And then, simply, the voice stopped. Dr. Robert never heard from James Mitchell again. But at 7:30 in the morning, when James's wife arrived at the hospital with their 2 young children to say goodbye to their husband and father, Dr. Robert kept his promise. He told her about the 12 lives James had saved, about how his last act had been one of love and protection for strangers who needed help. She smiled through her tears. Dr. Robert concluded, and said something I'll never forget. That's so like him. James always said that if he could save one life, his own life would have been worthwhile. He saved 12. What a gift he left me. And the 12 people, Marina? How did they end up after all this? Was the first question I managed to ask after hearing this entire extraordinary story. The smile that spread across Dr. Robert's face was the most beautiful confirmation I could have received. All of them, Marina. All 12 people not only survived, but recovered completely. Mrs. Thompson overcame the pulmonary embolism and was discharged a week later. William beat the sepsis and returned home to his family. Little Emma went through appendicitis surgery without complications. Mr. Rodriguez was discharged from cardiology with preventive treatment that probably added years to his life. Dr. Patricia added, Sophia completely recovered from meningitis and is now a healthy, vibrant child. Tyler's family was treated for carbon monoxide poisoning and all recovered completely. Dr. Robert continued the list with growing emotion in his voice. Mrs. Garcia never had allergic reactions again, because now we know exactly which medications to avoid. Kevin recovered from the fat embolism and went back to playing football. Sarah received proper treatment for postpartum depression and is now a happy mother caring for her 3 children. Mr. Davis recovered from the stroke without lasting effects because he was treated in time. Dr. Patricia completed. And little Isabella overcame the hospital infection and grew up strong and healthy. 12 lives that continued because of one impossible night to explain, but impossible to deny. What moved me most was knowing that Dr. Robert had changed profoundly after that experience. Marina, that night changed how I practice medicine, he confessed. I continue being a scientific doctor, based on evidence, but now I listen to my intuition. I listen to subtle signs I might have ignored before. I listen to what goes beyond tests and protocols. You know what marks me most about this story? Dr. Patricia added. It's that James used his last opportunity, his final moments of connection with this world, not to try to return to life, not to communicate with his family, but to save strangers. This speaks about who he was as a person, about the kind of soul that chooses good even facing their own death. 3 months after that extraordinary night, something happened that deeply touched the entire hospital team. James's wife, together with the families of the 12 people saved, organized a memorial ceremony for James in the hospital auditorium. It was the most moving event I've ever witnessed in my career. Dr. Robert told me, Imagine, Marina, 12 families gathered to thank a man they never knew, but who saved their lives through a doctor who allowed himself to believe in the impossible. Each family told how that mysterious medical intervention had changed their lives, how they were there, healthy and happy, because of something they couldn't explain, but knew was real. James's widow, Jennifer, gave a speech that left no dry eye in the auditorium. She said James always believed life had purpose, that each person was here to do good. Dr. Robert remembered, and discovering he had saved 12 lives in his farewell had given meaning to her pain, had shown that James's love would continue touching lives even after death. Today, whenever I attend a difficult case, a complicated diagnosis, I think of James, Dr. Robert confessed. Not that I expect to hear voices or have supernatural experiences again, but I remember that sometimes answers are beyond the obvious, that we need to be open to perceive signs our scientific training might make us ignore. Dr. Patricia agreed. That night taught us that medicine is as much art as science. It's as much technical knowledge as human intuition. It's as much protocol as love for life. James reminded us that saving lives is a sacred act that goes far beyond following procedures. What impresses me most about this story is how it changed everyone involved. Dr. Robert became an even more attentive doctor, even more sensitive to subtle details that can make the difference between life and death. The nursing team began working with renewed awareness about the impact of each action, each decision made in the hospital. Marina, the greatest lesson James left me wasn't about life after death or paranormal phenomena. Dr. Robert concluded. It was about the power of altruistic love. Even facing his own death, even knowing he would never return home, he chose to use his last strength to save strangers. This taught me that the true meaning of life is in how much good we can do for others. When Dr. Robert and Dr. Patricia finished telling this story, we remained silent for a long time. It was a silence full of reverence, gratitude, recognition, before something greater than we can understand. It was the silence of those who had just witnessed a miracle and knew they had been touched forever by it. If this story touched your heart in any way, know that you're not alone. We all carry our own battles, our fears, our doubts, but that's exactly why stories like this need to be told and heard. If you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope, share this video. Sometimes, one story can be the light someone needs to keep going. And if you have your own story to tell, leave it here in the comments. This space is ours, it's safe, and every word matters. I read every comment, and I know many of you also read and find strength in each other's experiences. Take care of yourself, take care of those you love. And remember, life is always worth it. Love never dies, it just transforms. A warm hug, and until next time.